So that's it, guys. That is the nervous system map. That's the entirety of it. There's a whole lot of details that I left out that we can talk about, but I can talk about this for a day and a half, basically. The repercussions of what it means in life and in mental health. But there are a couple of pieces that I did want to mention here that I think will really kind of bring it all together, right? So first of all, looking at this, you'll see that states 1 and 2 we circled in red. We call them hot symptoms, right? Because they're all anxiety, sympathetic, tension, upset, anger, those types of responses. And the good news here is that state 1 and 2 symptoms or events are really, relatively speaking, easy to deal with, right? They're kind of a piece of cake. Pretty much any graduate student that comes out of the trauma dynamics training is able to sit with people processing states 1 and 2 pretty well, and people are effective at resolving anxiety symptoms. If somebody comes into the office and this is what they have, they primarily have anxiety type symptoms or even panic type symptoms, that's actually good news. The prognosis is good on that. I would say, most exposure therapies are good at working with states 1 and 2. EMDR is great at working with states 1 and 2, right? However, the true art and science of working with a person's, the symptoms that are coming up for people, the true art and science of working with stress and trauma is not with working with states 1 and 2, it's working with states 3 and 4. So, having said that, I'm gonna read another quotation here from Bessel van der Kolk. A vast literature on combat trauma, crimes, rape, kidnapping, natural disasters, accidents, and imprisonment has shown that the trauma response is bimodal. Hypermnesia, hyperreactivity to stimuli, and traumatic re-experiencing coexist with psychic numbing, avoidance, amnesia, adonia. These responses to extreme experiences are so consistent across the different forms of traumatic stimuli that this bimodal reaction appears to be the normative response to any overwhelming, uncontrollable experience, right? So basically saying that this map that we're outlining for you, where there's hot anxiety reactions, energy-filled reactions, and depressive numbing reactions, is the norm, right? He's saying that we see this almost all the time in the field of mental health, but unfortunately, again, the modalities that we've had, our abilities, has mostly focused on just working with the state 1 and 2, the hot side, the anxious side of these reactions. We kind of fall apart when it comes to states 3 and 4. In state 1 and 2, you're tracking anxiety. You're working with what's upset in a person's world. Their mind has a good grasp of what's going on, and they can work with that. In states 3 and 4, you're working with what's missing. You're working with what's not there. You're working with, depression, which is sort of the absence of other feeling states. And particularly in state 4, you're just working with something that's just blanked out, right? So this is all to say we as a field have fallen short of being able to work with dissociation, of tracking dissociation, of even knowing when your client is dissociated, right? And so this is the good news here is that the expressive medicines that are starting to come online that we're working with at Innate Path are fantastic at excavating and working with dissociation, right? This is the place that they really, go to work. Basically, everything that's being contained under the level of consciousness, your subconscious, where all of these states 3 and 4 events are sitting, is exactly where the modality that we're using is designed to go, as well as the expressive medicines are designed to sort of, manifest these things that have been hidden from us for our entire lives, potentially. Right? One of the ways that the expressive medicines can really work with this is that they provide solution, especially in places that we never thought we had solution before, right? So again, considering that most of the time what creates states 3 and 4 events are things that happen to children, for the most part, solution for children will be their parents, right? Solution will be adults or a caring world, that kind of thing. And so one of the things that typically that can get provided when you combine psychotherapy with expressive medicines is a sense of existential solutions, a sense of the world and the universe as a very loving place. It provides a sense of trust. People under the influence of these medicines, actually their armoring relaxes, their defenses really relax, and they can actually let in a therapist in a way that they perhaps haven't been able to ever before. And when that happens, they get a sense of that they're not alone with this, right? They get a real sense that, wow, somebody really is in this place with me where I've been alone since my childhood. And things like that will really begin to shift a person's system. Basically adding in those types of solutions to a place that has a lot of dissociation will start to break down the dissociation in a really helpful way, right? So basically people begin to move out of state 4, out of state 3 when they have a sense that, wow, the world is actually not the way that I thought it was. If you're going into therapy and you actually want to work with these states that are stuck in your system, you want to be able to end the distractions so it can give your nervous system a chance to actually move the marbles and get them back down to 0, right? If you're constantly managing, if you're constantly coping with the symptoms that are coming up, then, on the one hand, great, you're functional, but on the other hand, you're having to constantly cope. You're not actually allowing your nervous system to do what it really wants to do to resolve the situation. Okay? So in therapy, we'll encourage people to end the distractions, to end the coping mechanisms, which I know sounds contrary to everything that you may have been doing in therapy yourself. And in fact, if you're a clinician yourself, you may be watching this video and say, wait a minute, I spent most of my graduate school figuring out how to give people better coping mechanisms. And again, I'm saying there's a place and time and value for coping. But if you're actually looking to resolve some of these things, then it's not about coping. It's about actually going into it and letting your body do what it wants to do. Okay? So what I just touched on there, this ending of distractions, that is a formal process that we have called containment. So we will contain a person's impulses to escape their own experience. We'll contain a person's fidgeting and moving and wiggling and mentally going to the beach, so that they can actually begin to associate to what happened to them, and then their body begins to process. But I'm not going to go into the details of that here. That's an entire training segment all by itself. But suffice it to say that it's a very powerful tool that we have. If you just basically end those coping mechanisms, then you'll see this very strong autonomic response kick on. And that's exactly what we're looking for, right? But I would say be careful with it if you try this at home with the little information I've given you, simply because, ending the coping really does sort of help us start to get associated with what's going on, like I said. And if you don't have the support, if you're not doing this in therapy, then it's probably, I wouldn't recommend it, okay? Okay, so finally, what does this all look like? What does it look like when the marbles really begin to move and shift nervous system states? Okay, so the first thing is that there's a couple of key points with this. One is that you allow your system to follow the map back to state 0, right? So basically all resolution looks like is the marbles are heading towards state 0. And again, this is not something you can willfully do. You can just set up the conditions for it, and your autonomic nervous system will do the rest. The more you try to do, the more you're actually going to get in the way, right? Just like the way your body catches you when you trip and fall, that's exactly what this is like, right? It's not you doing it. Okay, so the second piece here is that whatever state you start in, resolution means moving left. I think that's obvious just looking at the map there. And then finally, moving left on the map is a movement from dissociation to association. Symptoms and anxiety increase, and improvement paradoxically feels worse initially. Okay, so this is what we're talking about here, right? Take a look at the slide. So let's talk about starting from state 4, right? So if somebody is in state 4, remember, they're in that numbed out opioid kind of floaty state, right? And so the thing with this is that you cannot fight, as a clinician or you yourself just doing this yourself, you can't fight these nervous system states. You have to ally with them, right? So one of the things that we'll do is have people start to experience what it's like to be in state 4, what it's like to be dissociated. So if somebody's going there, we don't try and talk them out of it. We don't try and resist them going there. We'll say, okay, your system is going to state 4 when you talk about the car accident or when you talk about your childhood, you're going to state 4. So let's let you go there, but just take me with you, right? Describe what you're feeling, what you're seeing, what your experience is while you're in state 4. And typically people will say, I feel floaty, I feel nothing, it feels just like I'm in empty space. It feels like I'm in a black hole. A lot of people use that kind of imagery to describe state 4. And again, they'll initially like it. Initially, they'll be calm and quiet and kind of really what they've been looking for in some way. So I'll have them really enjoy it, right? Like I'll ask them, like, what is good about state 4? What is good about this place? And they'll say, it's safe, it's calm, right? And I'll say, okay, great. So stay there for as long as you possibly can, right? Allow this place to happen. And the trick is that you're having them, the client is becoming associated to the places that they are dissociated, right? And typically what they start to notice is that, maybe the downside of state 4, they'll at some point they'll say something like, it's a little lonely in here, right? Because remember, you are alone. When you are in an opioid state, you're not in relationship with anybody else. You just have this thing that's happening inside of you. And so one of the things that people notice in state 4 is that there's not much happening in there. There's no movement, there's no connection. It's just them inside of this blank space, right? So eventually you just have them keep noticing it, and they'll start to kind of float down and start feeling parts of their body, and eventually they'll say something like, I'm feeling a little sad, or I'm feeling a little heavy, or something like that. So basically what's happening is they're moving out, they're starting to reassociate, they're starting to move out of state 4 and move into state 3, right? And that is a huge movement. That is because, especially for somebody who's lived an entire childhood in state 4, right? So think about what that means. It's somebody whose sense of the world is that it's so dangerous that they have to live in this hidden cave inside of themselves for most of their life. So for that person to start experiencing the blankness of state 4, the downside of it, and starting to come out of it, it's a huge deal, right? And it will take time. But so moving out of blankness, they're moving into life. And unfortunately, the version of life they're moving into is state 3, right? So they're moving into heaviness, depression, sadness, hopelessness, right? So, so it sounds paradoxical that this is a positive movement, but it really is. You have to trust me on this one, that somebody moving from a non-existent state, they're outside of the world, they're outside of feeling, and they're moving back into the world. The first things that they're going to feel are state 3 symptoms, right? So you have to sort of, let them know that this is okay, this is expected, this is actually positive movement. You're feeling, you're back into the world now, okay? And so then let's talk about state 3. So they're going to feel the cold, dead, numbed outside of state 3. And eventually, so that's what we're going to have them become associated to, right? We're not going to fight them on that. We're not going to talk them out of it. We're going to say, great, feel this dead place inside of yourself, and take me with you. Describe it to me. Tell me what it's like for you to be there. And so they're going to feel this place, and then at some point they're going to feel the hopelessness of it. They're going to feel like this has always been here and it's never going to change. And we'll have them stay with that. We're not even going to fight that. It's their sense. It's their experience. It's your experience and your reality. So it's not something to fight. It's something to become associated with. And once that happens, then eventually that will lead to more emotionality, more sadness, and maybe the beginnings of upset. Maybe the beginnings of kind of being pissed off that, God damn it, this has been here this entire time and it's not getting better and it's not going away and I hate it and I've always hated it, things like that, right? So basically what's happening then is the client is moving from state 3, the dead cold side of state 3, the numbed out opiate side of state 3, to the hot side of state 3. Remember, state 3 is dual activated, right? So they're moving from cold state 3 to anxious, upset, activated state 3, which is a very positive movement, right? So again, guys, you're gonna have to take my word for it. So somebody is moving into anger. Somebody is moving into their fight or flight responses. So in other words, their system is saying, okay, I'm coming out of this giving up place and now I'm ready to fight, right? So that's what's happening there. And so as they climb this wave, going up from state 3 towards state 2, they're going to feel more and more anxiety, more and more panic, which, as a clinician, you have to really sort of support them in and coach them in and let them know that, okay, this is okay. I'm right here with you. This is going to be sort of big and scary, but I'm not letting go. We're going through this together, right? And so as they reach the top of that state, between that curve between state 3 and state 2, they're going to hit a full panic wave. Now, the good news of that is that, remember, panic attacks only last 30 seconds, right? Again, we think they're going to last a long time. Resisting a panic attack can last all day, but the actual panic wave only lasts 30 seconds. And that's the point at which their system is giving them all these impulses, all these sensations that, I'm gonna die, that kind of thing, right? So they need a lot of support when they're doing that. But they crest that wave and then they go to state 2, which is not it's not a trough, right? So state 2 is not gonna hold the marble. And so the marble's just gonna go down to state 1 and either sit there, or it's going to, more than likely, it's going to go down to state 1 and then go down to state 0 because there's just so much momentum going down from that state 2 wave. Right, so that's a lot. That's a lot that we're asking the client to do there, and so they need a lot of support and a lot of trust in their own process. And again, so we're moving from dissociated state 4 to dissociated state 3. To depressed, heavy, collapsed state 3, to highly anxious state 3, to panic attack state 2, and then finally down to state 1 and state 0. And guys, as difficult as that sounds, my sense about this, having watched this process with a lot of people and having gone through this process myself, it is a lot easier to actually do that than to not do it. Right? It is a lot easier to actually do what I just described there than to live, 15, 20 years with these nervous system marbles just charged up in these dissociated places, creating symptoms and ultimately wrecking your physical health, wrecking your body, right? So, but the key is one of the ways that part of our protocol here that we recommend people working with this is having them practice that wave from going from state 1 to state 0, state 1 to state 0, because that's pretty mild, right? That's just a bump in anxiety, it peaks and then gets better. Bump in anxiety, peaks and then gets better. So we'll have clients do that particular wave 3, 4, 5 times, however many times they need to do it before they're really comfortable. And once they're comfortable, then their system understands that, oh, I get it. Okay, so I stay with this difficult experience, I peak with it, and then things get much better on the other side, right? So we'll have them do that for as long as they want to, and then when they're ready, we'll have them then start shifting over into doing the same thing with state 3 or state 2 or state 4, things like that, right? So we're really training their system to develop trust in the process. Now, here is where the expressive medicines are really helpful as well, because all the support and the trust and the safety and the solution that somebody needs to go up and over these waves, it can take some time in regular therapy to install those that foundation for a person in place, right? So I'll put it this way: for a healthy person, somebody with very little, let's say somebody who had like a really stable, secure childhood, and then something happened to them when they were 20 years old, right? So if that person comes into therapy, we can get that person to do these waves in the first session, right? It's that basically a healthy person has a very responsive, healthy nervous system that's able to do this type of waving very early on. It's the person that's chronically stressed, that chronically is traumatized or has a really chaotic childhood, that person needs a lot of sort of support and safety and resources and foundation building before they're able to do this process. Now, what happens with these expressive medicines is that if the chronically stressed or insecure childhood person is under the influence of one of these expressive medicines, it actually allows them to engage in this waving process very early on, meaning that they get a sense of safety, a sense of trust that is, albeit artificial, it's being given to them by this medication, but the amount of processing that they can do while they're in that state is profound. Okay guys, so I know I threw a lot of theory at you. You got these maps rolling around in your head. You're wondering what applies to you, what doesn't apply to you. So let me see if I can give you one takeaway here that will summarize and sort of, something that you can leave this video with, which is this, that your body was designed for this, right? Your body by itself goes to these different nervous system states and by itself can come back from those nervous system states. This is a mechanism that was built into the mammalian nervous system over millions of years of evolution. We're not creating it. We are just finding ways to sort of tap into that glorious piece there, right? So the mind was never designed for this, right? The mind that is able to, do math calculations and get us to the moon and build civilizations and all of that stuff, which is fantastic, was never designed for this. When you go into therapy, particularly regular talk therapy, and you're sitting there and you're trying to connect the dots and get a better understanding of what happened and what it all means, and you're working with it at that level. At some level, that's just interesting to the mind, of course, but it fundamentally doesn't create a shift at the level that we're talking about here. Sort of understanding something doesn't create a nervous system shift. That is a totally different part of your physiology that handles that. So we're saying let your nervous system, let your body do what it was really designed to do well, right? And let your mind do what it was designed to do well, as opposed to, trying to use a screwdriver for a hammer or something like that. It's the wrong tool for the job. So if you are going into therapy and you're trying to work with this stuff through, your insight and your understanding, we think that's a pretty inefficient way to approach this, right? So again, these pathways were built into the mammalian system. They're ancient. We can't improve this, right? So if anything that we do in therapy ought to reference this pathway. If we don't, we're just kind of trying to reinvent the wheel and we're not doing a very good job of it, right? So we're saying your system's already built for this and take this route. And we find that most patients really, once they get introduced to this, once they do that state 1 to state 0 wave a number of times, that they're on this path. Their system is like, great, I don't have to remember stuff, I don't have to take notes, I don't have to do anything. It's just my body knows how to process, right? Now, again, I mentioned this earlier, but working with expressive medicines really does support this process in lots and lots of ways. But one of the big ways that it does is that it seems to sort of decrease the conversation between the prefrontal cortex, you know, that sort of conscious, rational, very newly developed human part of our brains, and the limbic system. Basically, the part of our bodies that want to go into this reaction but are censored from doing so by sort of our conscious mind. It kind of gets that, expressive medicines kind of get that part out of the way, and it leaves room for the body to do what it does best, okay? So that's the big takeaway. Okay guys, thank you for your time, your attention. If you have questions for us about anything that we touched on today, please do get a hold of us. We're happy to answer questions. If you are looking for work, to receive work by a clinician that works in this model, you can also contact us. And certainly if you're looking to combine what we talked about today with expressive medicines like ketamine, cannabis, and hopefully soon to be MDMA, you can please do contact us as well. Take care.